Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, on today's podcast, we're going to be exploring the idea of, does spanking save marriages?
But before we get to that, we want to remind you to like and subscribe. And remember, when you subscribe, it makes me smile. And right below in the description is a link to our Patreon, where you can have access to all kinds of different things. And we want to encourage you, if you'd like to have some more content, to check that out and maybe be a part of our Patreon community.
As well as we offer YouTube memberships now, so ways to get involved there.
Yeah, so get involved with that.
All right, guys, so this idea came to me this week when I was scrolling through social media, and there was a post that I saw this week where a wife was basically kind of expressing some issues that were happening in her marriage. And basically, she was talking about how she was making an ongoing mistake in her marriage, really related to how she was handling the finances and how she was being irresponsible with getting into debt, and how she was managing the resources of the home, and how this was causing a lot of issues in her marriage. And her husband was kind of fed up with this cycle, because it had happened a few times where she had racked up a lot of debt. They worked hard, and he worked hard to rectify that debt, get them back into a good financial position, and then she did it again. And so in this post, she was expressing how he had kind of emotionally checked out and was kind of threatening divorce over this situation if she didn't really get her act together and make some serious changes in how she was conducting herself in the marriage and the behavior that she was exhibiting. So this group was not a domestic discipline group, and so I didn't want to chime in, but it really got me thinking, how often does spanking curb these behaviors and really save potential threats of divorce? Because I know that if we had issues like that, it would be dealt with through discipline, and we would never get to the point where divorce would need to happen.
First off, I hope that everything's going to turn out okay for them, because obviously, I'm sure you all are thinking like us. It's always a terrible thing when you hear about couples that are getting on the brink of splitting. And so that's never a good thing. So I hope that that works out. But yeah, I think, you know, we've said many times before on this podcast that when we brought domestic discipline into the fold for our relationship, thank goodness we were not on the brink of splitting or on a divorce or anything like that. But our relationship obviously had gotten stale, and we really wanted to bring something special to it. But I think, Aria, that if we had not adapted domestic discipline, at least the way I see it now, we may have, again, I don't know if we'd be on the brink of divorce, I hope not, but I do think that the problems in our relationship, especially some of the things that were stagnating at that time, may have gotten worse, and I do think domestic discipline has saved our relationship in many ways.
Yes, I completely agree. I think domestic discipline revived our relationship.
That's a good word. I like the word revived. Yeah.
And really saved it from going further down the path of destruction. And again, I don't know if we've ever had any issue big enough to potentially lead to divorce, but I'm very thankful that we didn't let it get to that point, because who's to say that it wouldn't have gotten to that point along the way if we didn't institute some changes.
What domestic discipline does, and the reason we believe that this idea of implementing it, and especially the idea of implementing the spanking into your domestic discipline, is it allows for your relationship to have structure, to have both parties, both the taken in hand and the head of household, to be able to breathe a little bit, from the standpoint that she knows where the now fence is and where she can play within that fence, but not go outside of it. And it gives the head of household the ability to watch what she's doing better, instruct and to coach better. And when she gets outside of that, to hopefully be able to put her back in the place that she needed to be in order to benefit the relationship, not to hurt the relationship. I think our relationships especially could do with a lot more structure, and that's why domestic discipline can be that thing to save your relationship if it's lacking structure and it's lacking the spark that you're looking for.
And I think that that really is the key right there, is that you need to implement a structure. Because in this situation that I read about on social media, where this wife who, from my understanding, is a stay-at-home wife, she was just lacking a lot of structure and boundaries and direction from her husband, and it was allowing her to kind of get herself into trouble. And how much more loving and how much kinder would it have been for her husband to step in and implement those boundaries with her before it got to the point where it had created a behavior cycle where she was doing this destructive thing over and over and over again, before it led him to the point of such immense frustration that he was willing to walk away from the marriage because she was not able to control her habits. And even if you don't want to implement spanking, even though I think that that is something that we would say is very useful in domestic discipline, it's very useful in relationships to have that immediate consequence and a severe consequence for behavior. But even at that, even if they don't want to practice domestic discipline, for him to not step in and take over the budget and give her boundaries around how she spends the resources of the home. And so it just got me thinking, how often do we, as taken in hands, as wives, how often do we need our husbands to step in, to give us that structure, to give us those boundaries, so that we don't inadvertently or unintentionally cause stress and strife in our marriages? And if more husbands would step up, be the head of the household, would step in, give those boundaries, give those consequences, and be kind and loving to their wives to preserve the relationship, to preserve the integrity of the relationship before it falls apart, how much stronger would our marriages be? How much would our marriages thrive under that type of system? And if a marriage is on kind of the breaking point, the brink of these things causing some much harder and much more detrimental consequences like divorce, like separation, how many of those marriages can be brought back into a place of renewal and a place of thriving by implementing these structures and these consequences?
You know, you brought up a good point just now that is kind of what I was saying earlier. Doing these things, putting boundaries in place and following through with punishments, that is being loving. It's looked at as not a loving thing, but if you care about your spouse like you say that you do, then you will implement these things. You will hold them accountable to these things because it's for their benefit, not to their detriment. And that is also why spanking is, in our opinion, the right way to go about it. Because what does spanking do? It is a realistic consequence that they know they're going to get for violating the rules. And that maybe that healthy fear is what I think of. Fear can be a healthy thing. That fear of potentially going through that punishment, whatever it is, helps them to stay within those boundaries and to go down the correct path that you want them to go down, not only for yourself, but for them and for the relationship. And that's why it's so important, I think, to make sure that spanking is a part of your domestic discipline relationship.
And if you are contemplating whether or not domestic discipline is the right move for your relationship, and you're worried because you're like, we have so much, like we have all these big relationship issues that we need to sort through and work through, domestic discipline can come in and help you through the process of sorting through those issues. Now, there might be some issues that domestic discipline is not appropriate for. You know, if you are going through, you know, anger, if extreme anger is a part of the landscape of your home, if there is any type of abuse in the marriage, and I would say if there's infidelity, those are issues that domestic discipline really isn't necessarily the right course of action for. You really do need to sort through those issues first, because a head of household that cannot control his anger, cannot control himself, has no business trying to impose control onto a taken in hand.
And really, if you're having these issues that Aria just named, what you really need to do is seek out some type of counseling, whether it be a marriage counselor or a psychiatrist or anything to help you, because she's absolutely right. Before you start to work on the relationship as the whole, either one of you or both of you maybe need to have a separate session to try to work out any of those issues, which of course we don't talk a lot about on here because we're not licensed professionals. But we would encourage you, if you're having that problem right now and you're watching this, please seek out professional help. That's the best thing you can do for your relationship right now before you implement domestic discipline.
Yes, we are not marriage counselors, and even if we were, we're not your marriage counselor.
That's right. So, that's exactly right.
You definitely need to seek out those issues. Also, I wanted to address any type of addiction. If addiction is part of what is going on in your relationship, don't bring domestic discipline into it until that issue is under control. Just wanted to throw that out there because I don't want to give the impression that we are saying that domestic discipline is a magic fix-all, that all of your life's problems will just magically fade away. But if you're having these more, I would say more normal ups and downs of what can happen in marriages, where maybe there is an issue of overspending or not taking care, you know, the taken in hand isn't taking care of themselves, or they're not taking care of the home, or they're not taking care of the children properly. All of those things can and maybe should be addressed with spanking, because having those consequences, having that boundary, having those structures, having that those rules and that authority in place can and really does make a huge difference in developing the right attitudes and the right behaviors in those areas.
Absolutely. And as we were talking about earlier, there can be other consequences besides spanking. But one of the things that we found with spanking is because it gives that immediate consequence if you follow through. And it's not necessarily something, I think Aria would agree with this and a lot of other taken hands, that they like. So again, it gives that healthy fear of don't violate the rules, because they don't want to have to go through a spanking. They don't want to have to go through that. And so it keeps them on that path of trying to implement the things that you're trying to implement in your relationship. And that can be very, very effective. Now, there are some other things that you can do out there. We're not debating that, spanking is the only way to get those things done. But what we found in our relationship and in other relationships of the people that we talk with that are in a domestic discipline relationship, the overall consensus seems to be that spanking really is one of the most effective things that you can do for your domestic discipline relationship.
So going back to that story that I read, where her issue really was that she was not being responsible with the resources and the financial resources of the home and how she was spending the money. In that situation, Do I think a spanking would do her good? Absolutely. I think that setting that boundary to say that you made a mistake here and you are going to have this immediate and painful consequence of a spanking, I think that that would have done a really good for her to feel the weight of her decisions and of her mistake. However, that is not the only thing that needed to happen in her situation. Many times, spanking is not the only thing that you introduce to fix these problems. You have to follow up with other structures. So I feel like her husband really should have sat her down and said, this behavior is going to stop. You cannot continue spending our resources this way. You are putting us into a position where we are not meeting financial goals and we are going into debt, and that is very difficult to get out of. And we are not going to be doing this anymore. I'm not going to allow you to do this anymore. And so really he should have sat down, created a budget, shown her the budget and said, this is what you are allowed to spend in these areas. Anything outside of this, you need my permission. And implemented a system where she needed to ask permission in order to spend outside of those negotiated budget areas. Also, in my opinion, he should have said, okay, you are responsible for maybe buying the groceries, taking care of household needs, gas for the car, certain budget areas that she has access to, but then he should really be the one implementing paying the bills so that he's taking care of the other budget areas and only giving her limited access to the areas of the budget that she needs, and maybe even putting her on a cash system where if she has X amount of money for groceries, he gives that to her in cash and says, this is for groceries. And then follow it through with, if you spend the grocery money on a new purse, then not only are we going to go and return that purse so that we can get that money back and spend it appropriately, but you're going to get a spanking for not being responsible with the budget that you were given for the things that we needed for our home. And so just having that conversation, having those boundaries put into place, putting those rules into place, and also letting her know that it's not a one-time spanking. Like, you don't just get a spanking because you put us in debt and then you get to continue to do what you're doing.
Right.
You're getting the spanking, and then we are putting some very strict boundaries in place. And if you go outside of those boundaries, there will be further consequences that will include a spanking. Now, sometimes, that one spanking is enough to say, hey, I don't ever want to go through that again. I'm going to really pay attention. Sometimes it takes a few mistakes along the way to really get the message. And so that is how you can implement spanking to save your marriage from these detrimental behaviors that can really lead to the desire to check out, to maybe separate, maybe get divorced. All of those things are not how we want to live within our relationships. I don't want an emotionally checked out partner. I don't want someone who is just not going to care about our relationship, about what we're doing. And so it really does hurt the relationship, even if you stay married. These behaviors, unaddressed, really do hurt the relationship. And so you really do need to address the behavior, punish what has happened, but then set up standards so that they know where those boundaries are and be consistent in continuing to punish them for going outside those boundaries.
The key here, and of all the things that Ari have said, which is all of it is good, but the first step, if you heard, is that there needs to be a conversation. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but I always feel like it's worth emphasizing. In your relationship, in order to implement anything, there's got to be a very heart-to-heart conversation. And so in this situation, it would be difficult, but it's always important that before giving any type, even if you have rules established, even if you know she knows exactly what the consequences are going to be because you've already put those in place. Have the conversation. You know you violated this, so therefore you are going to have this if you already have the rules implemented. If you haven't and you're starting a domestic discipline relationship, sit down and, again, as she said, explain why. Say, this is hurting our relationship, and it's hurting our family. It's hurting everything. It's hurting all of our goals. Everything that we're trying to do to make a better life for ourselves, a better marriage, all of those things, it's hurting us. We need, we have to have some structure. We have to have, something has to give. And so therefore we need to implement not only structure, but consequences in order for you to stop the behavior that's hurting our relationship. It's very, very important to have those conversations.
And it really, I think that one thing that we don't want to kind of dismiss is the consent aspect.
Yes.
Is if you are in this situation where your wife is really causing some major issues in the relationship, whether it's overspending or not taking care of the home, not fulfilling her responsibilities, and you think that spanking is a way to save yourself from the heartache of these bigger issues such as separation or divorce, it is really important that she gives her consent to participating in domestic discipline. That way, when you go into this structure, she understands and she also consents to submitting to these punishments. Now, I think that if you are already at that point where it's kind of a make or break for your relationship, it's okay for that heart-to-heart to say, look, something needs to change. There has to be some consequences here. And this is the system that I think would really benefit us. If you're not willing to do that, then we really do need to rethink what we're doing here and rethink that if this marriage is going to survive. If you're already at the point where you are willing to throw in the towel, if you are willing to pursue divorce over the issues that are happening, I don't necessarily think that that's an inappropriate ultimatum to make.
I agree. Yeah.
Now, be open to negotiation too. If she's like,
Yes.
hey, I'm not willing to submit to the physical spanking aspect, but I'm willing to give you authority to impose other consequences, such as, you know, again, in this situation, taking away access to credit cards, putting her on a cash system, taking over the budget, and really managing that aspect that she is really messing up in. If she's willing to do that, then again, you have to decide what you are willing to do at that point based on history of your relationship and what's gone on. But again, I don't think it's a bad thing to give those ultimatums if you're already at that point. Absolutely.
I mean, in my opinion, if you're already there, it couldn't possibly get any worse other than because you're already there. So sometimes it's worth just saying, hey, we've got to bare our souls here. We've got to really just get down to the nitty gritty and just lay all the cards on the table. And that's where this really, if you decide to implement this and you're at that point in your relationship, what do you got to lose? Throw the cards on the table.
What you don't want to do, though, is feel entitled to impose discipline.
That's right.
On your spouse, because that's just not the way
No.
our society works. That's not the way our legal system works. And so do not feel like you are able to just come in and impose those consequences without that conversation and without her confirmation that she's willing to submit to that process.
And so really to kind of sum this up a little bit for you is that if you're in a relationship where maybe you're struggling like this, or maybe you're just struggling a little bit. Maybe you were where Ari and I were in our relationship when we implemented domestic discipline. Sit down again. Have a very, very candid, open, honest conversation and really explain why. That's the best thing that you can do, is explain why you think that this would help. And remember, at the end of the day, it's about order. It's not about worth. Both people in the relationship are worth something. They're human beings. They bring something unique and wonderful to the relationship. But that order doesn't mean that you're demeaning one person over the other. It's a structure in order to bring about harmony, in order to bring about a ultimate goal of achieving a relationship that you both can thrive in and achieve the goals that you set out, hopefully, when you first got married and got together. And that's the point that we really want to make, is that we think the domestic discipline brings the structure that could help any couple. We really believe that. We're not forcing every couple to do it, but we really think any couple could benefit from it because it brings the order for them to be able to succeed. So,
yes. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I hope you got something out of it. Let us know what you think down below in the comments. And if you want to join our membership here on YouTube or on Patreon, links to all that is down below as well. Thank you so much. We will talk to you next time.
See you later.